Okay. Well, thanks so much to everyone who was able to join us for this. I appreciate the flexibility and being able to hop on the quickly rescheduled call. So I do appreciate you showing up for our September CISMA call. So today we have Dr. Brent Sellers, who's going to talk to us about Smutgrass. Before I give the mic over to him, proverbially, I just want to remind everybody that these calls are recorded and that you can watch them after the fact on the FiskPack YouTube channel.
It's a meeting.
Uh, and if I'm going to ask if you could all keep yourselves muted for the duration of the talk. Feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go through the talk, or you can hold on to your questions at the end, and we'll have a quick Q&A with Dr. Sellers about the presentation. After the presentation, I'll also run through some updates, just some general FiskPack calendar updates before I let you all go. I think with that, that's all the info I needed to share. So I'm going to go ahead and take it away, Dr. Sellers. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Christian. I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay. So, like Christian said, I'm Brent Sellers. I started here in 2004 at the Range Cattle RAC in Ona, Florida, primarily working in pastures and rangeland. So that's why I got dubbed the Smutgrass Guru, I guess, back then, even though I wasn't much of a guru. And still today, I don't feel like much of a guru on Smutgrass, but I feel like we've learned a lot over the last 20 years. So my plan today is kind of go through a little bit of the history. I'm not going to bore you with a lot, but then go into the path we went to try to figure out how to better control smutgrass, primarily in pastures, but I think there is some overlap we could do in natural areas as well. So even if you don't work in pastures, I think there's some information you could get from this too. And all right, so when I first got here in Florida, this is one of the first pictures I took, and this was down around the bell. It's like, boy, that's bad. And now I'd probably take a picture of that pasture and not see any Bahia grass whatsoever. I mean, that's just how bad smut grass has gotten throughout the state. And in fact, I would say it's been moving northward a little bit more and more each year, but I'll get to that in a second. All right, so we do have two species of Sporobolus in Florida. There may even be a third. There's some argument about that. In fact, my colleagues I have in Australia that I went and visited back in 2018, they're arguing that they need to start over with that whole genus. So there's a lot of confusion and identification of these species. But primarily, we do have two species, small smutgrass, giant smutgrass. In the picture, small smutgrass is on the left, giant smutgrass is on the right. I tend to see much more small smutgrass in the northern part of the state, especially out in the panhandle, and then the rest of the southeast compared to giant smutgrass. I still see a little bit of small smutgrass in central and southern Florida, but primarily it's mostly giant smutgrass. So just to give you a timeline, 1950s, small smutgrass was first noticed as a serious weed in Florida, especially pastures, as they started taking native rangeland and improving it to get better grasses, forages for the cattle. They started noticing this grass. And in the 1970s, they were saying that about 75% of improved pastures were infested with small smutgrass. And then 1990s, giant smutgrass was first detected and has since exploded. So that's kind of where we're at today. So since it started back in the 1950s, here at this center, they actually started some research, and they obviously didn't have many herbicides back then. So they were looking at mowing, and they looked at how mowing frequency impacted smutgrass production as far as number of plants and as far as the basal width of the clumps. And so they either mowed every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, or every 4 weeks from August until November. And basically you don't see much reduction. I mean, 50% reduction in basal width if you mow it every week. Economically, that's impractical. So that's not anything we'd ever recommend, but that's some of the information they got back then. But I guess the take home from all of this was that you don't really decrease the number of plants per se. And in fact, if you mow every 3 or 4 weeks, you may be spreading it more by seed production. So we really fast forward to when I first got here in 2004. This was the recommendation, hexazinone, which is an active ingredient in Velpar, also now Tide hexazinone, and Helena Chemical has one called Velosa. It's a little bit more concentrated than the other two. But in general, it was 3/4 to a pound per acre of hexazinone, and 1/2 pound per acre was acceptable, but you should expect some inconsistencies in control. But sometimes it would work really well. You get 90% control using 1/2 pound per acre. And the key caveat was to apply this during the summer, during the rainy season, because what they determined back then was that most of the uptake into smutgrass was through the roots, versus broadleaf plants, you'd get more uptake through the foliage. Now, there were problems with this because if you had a large infestation of smutgrass in the pasture, and considering that hexazinone would kill the smutgrass that was there, you'd end up with large open spots, sometimes bare ground eventually. So you'd be trading one weed problem with another. So, you know, when I first got here, tropical soda apple was a big issue. That was one of the weeds that would come in. And at that point, there really wasn't a great answer for that either. The other problem with hexazinone is the most expensive herbicide we have for pastures. That's maybe not true, but the one they use the most often. The other problem that we ran into, and this is something we realized when we first started, was that it was really, really inconsistent. And so I spent 5 or 6 years, you know, just looking at different rates and trying to get my handle on it. And one year, a low rate would do phenomenally well. The next year, it would be really, really bad, like you never sprayed it. So I started looking at some stuff and trying to figure out where we could go. How can we make this more effective? How can we make this more economical for our producers? And how can we really manage it better? So I'm going to try to walk you through this table because it's a little bit confusing. So in 2008, we went out into 2 different sites and set up plots. So these numbers right here indicate our density per square meter of smutgrass before any treatment was applied. After we collected that data, we had 3 treatments in those pastures, or in those plots. One was what we would call a fully recommended rate of hexazinone, pound per acre. We did renovation, 3 pounds per acre of the acid equivalent of glyphosate, dissed and reseeded Bahia grass. And then in the fall, we came in and we did a roller chopping exercise in those plots. And the idea was to overseed it with ryegrass, maybe give the smutgrass a little bit of competition. But it was so dry that year, we ended up not even overseeding it with ryegrass. All right, so had our initial counts, we performed these treatments, came back in 2009 and collected our smutgrass densities again. So applying hexazinone reduced our density to less than half a plant per square meter. And surprisingly, we almost doubled our smutgrass density by renovating, which I was not expecting at all. And also with fall roller chopping, we decreased our density of living plants. That one actually surprised me too. But after looking at that some more and seeing that done later on, it makes sense because the roller chopper will actually roll those clumps out of the ground and turn them upside down. So you do end up with less plants in that pasture. So after we collected these counts in 2009, we went back over the entire experimental area with a half rate of hexazinone. Came back in 2010 and 2011, and you see that we almost got to zero in 2010 with fall roller chopping followed by hexazinone. And we did fairly well even with the other treatments. What was interesting, I wish we would have carried this out a couple more years to see if this is actually true. But it looks like we have a trend where we renovated that without applying more hexazinone another year, like in 2010, we might have started to see an increase overall compared to the other treatments when we renovate and just follow it with one treatment of hexazinone. So that was one study we did, which I think provided us some insight. This was a little bit confusing too, but follow me with this. So these were large 20 by 20 foot plots, and we sprayed the entire plot. We did take our initial densities, but if you just compare this to the untreated up here, you get the idea what was going on. So in 2008, we went out with a half pound, 3/4 pound, and 1 pound. And then 2009, we came back with a half pound or 3/4 pound or none. And I thought it was interesting when we went a half pound followed by half pound, 24 months after treatment, we had substantially less smutgrass than when we applied nothing. But when you go out 3 years following the second application, that smutgrass really rebounds. And you see that with this here, you see that with the 3/4 pound rate followed by nothing. You see that with the full rate followed by nothing. But when you have at least a half pound followed by at least 3/4 pound, or 3/4 pound followed by at least a half pound, 3 years out, our densities are still fairly low. Now, does that mean we could have stopped there? Probably not, because if we would have waited another year without or done this at 48 months after treatment, we'd probably start to see an increase in those plots too. So we said, okay, we're going back to our original data in the late 2000s and looking at some of this work that we just completed here. And we're still seeing some inconsistencies. And I actually tried to take this study and ramp it up into more of a field scale. And it failed miserably. And I saw more hair follicles fall out of my head, just frustrated beyond belief. So then it's like, we started looking at weather patterns and trying to figure out if we could correlate rainfall perhaps with hexazinone applications. Is there any direct relationship with that? So to get at that first, we did a simulated rainfall study in the greenhouse. And we started to see some pretty interesting results. No rainfall. We got about 20 to 30% visual injury. You got 1/4 inch of rainfall, you get complete and utter kill. An inch of rainfall, about 90%, 95 sometimes percent control, and you get above an inch and it just fails miserably. So that's the greenhouse. That's good information to have because it kind of gives you an idea, but it's not real world. So my PhD student at the time, we went out every week on a Friday and sprayed plots and measured rainfall from April through, I think it was the end of September. So we have weekly applications and we recorded weekly rainfall in that field. So we had an idea what we were getting. So this is a compilation of 2 years of data from this work. And we have percent control on the y-axis, application dates. I'm sorry, I don't have September on this slide, but you're going to get the idea from this slide what was going on. And you can see the orange line is the rainfall that we received in inches, and then the blue bars is the percent control that were recorded in the field. So you see a lot of fluctuation in rainfall, common for central and southern Florida. And it's interesting, early in the season, 65% control with about an inch of rainfall in April. I mean, not great, but not horrible. I mean, they got something out of that application. But you compare that to a week later where we had no rainfall within 7 days and only 20% control. That's that's where producers get really irritated that they spent upwards of 50, 60 bucks an acre and not getting much activity. So basically, just to take this home, what we found was it kind of matched our greenhouse, but somewhere between 1/4 inch of rainfall and more than 3 inches of rainfall is the sweet spot. That's what we need to have within 7 days to get hexazinone to work decently. Another thing we tried to do with this study is tried to correlate soil moisture at the time of application with hexazinone activity. And our statistician said we would never be able to collect enough data to get that. So we're kind of stuck with this rainfall data, but observationally, the more saturated our soil is, the least likely it's able to leach below the root zone and not be available for uptake. So I think there's two things that are going on with that, but we can only prove the rainfall statistically at this point in time. We also looked at wiping smutgrass, and I do have a pretty large data set on this one, but what I've discovered working with producers since we put this research together and gave them recommendations, that you could give them the best recommendations ever, and sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. And basically what it boiled down to is the actual person that was operating the equipment more so than anything. So the more experience that somebody had with using a weed wiper, the better results they got. So I've always told people that using a weed wiper is more of an art than it is a science. So if they have the art down, I can help them with the rates. But if they're just going out and trying this one time, I'm going to try to coach them as much as I can, but there's only so much you can do. So wiping does work. Like I said, it is more of an art. And one of my producers joked with me one day. He said, Brent, you just got to make sure that you put the dope in the tank and not in the tractor. So you have that. All right, another thing that we looked at was using glyphosate for selective smutgrass control in mostly Bahia grass pastures, but also had some producers looking at this in some other forage species as well, like Bermuda grass and stargrass, which are both cynodon species. The question was, well, how much do you really need for smutgrass control? And most of the producers that I was talking to about this were using somewhere between 24 and 40 ounces per acre. And knowing that it takes 4 quarts per acre usually to really control Bahia grass and some of our perennial forages as well. That gave us an opportunity to look at that. So I'm not going to bore you with slides on this one. I'm just going to show you pictures because I think it tells a better story. So I have an untreated. So these plots were actually mowed 2 weeks before application, which gives smutgrass ample time for regrowth. So this is going to be now 30 days after treatment. So this is 6 weeks approximately after it was mowed. A lot of smutgrass seed heads in the untreated plot. As we started applying higher rates of glyphosate, you can see less seed heads at 8 ounces. And then we actually get some dying of smutgrass material at 16 and 32. So this was at the Seminole Tribe in Brighton where we did this work. So this was in year 1. In year 2, we repeated this in Hope Sound. Didn't quite get the same results, but I think I can explain that to you why we didn't get the same results. So same scenario, it was mowed 2 weeks before application. This was done in May versus June at the Seminole Tribe, or I'm sorry, July at the Seminole Tribe. So this was done in May in Hope Sound. You do see a definite reduction in seed head production, but we did not see the death or the dying material at these higher rates that we did see at the Seminole Tribe. And I really believe that had to do with flooding of those plots within 2 days after we made our applications. Slowed the smutgrass growth down enough that it basically just sat there and was able to metabolize that glyphosate and eventually grow out of it. So I think it could work. Going to work every time? Probably not. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I think I took a break from Smutgrass for a year or two because I got frustrated, and then decided to look at some other things. I had a lot of questions from producers. Can we apply liquid urea ammonium nitrate with Velpar and maybe, get our Bahia grass to respond a little bit quicker? And I said, well, potentially, but using liquid UAN typically does burn the grass a little bit, but we can look at it. So we conducted this in 2019 at 2 locations. We applied hexazinone at 1 and 2 quarts, so that's a half pound and a full pound, respectively. And then we used 32% urea ammonium nitrate at 0 and 50 units of N per acre. And we applied this with the tractor sprayer, a continuous agitation at 30 gallons per acre, and normal weed science nerd stuff, visual estimates control, and at 0 and 30 days, 60 days after treatment, we also did some plant counts. So this is actually some cool data. When we applied 50 pounds of N with what I would call our half rate of hexazinone, it was comparable to our full rate of hexazinone in water or with 50 pounds of N. So that was pretty exciting. We were pretty excited about that, and we saw that at both locations. And that was just visual estimates and control. And this was smutgrass density. What we found is when we actually dug down into the clumps of the grass and the lower rate, not every clump would be completely dead. So if we saw any green tissue whatsoever, we said that clump was alive. But still, adding that nitrogen to a half rate of hexazinone substantially increased our smutgrass control, because this is reduction in smutgrass density, if you didn't catch that. And even though it was less than our full rate of hexazinone with or without UAN, is still 65% control at a half rate. And I feel we could get that consistently, then I think that's a great step forward. So then we decided that we're going to try to ratchet down our nitrogen rates to make this a little bit more economical. So we went down to smaller plots and used our ATV sprayer without continuous agitation. And we figured out that by the time we mix the UAN, the water, and the hexazinone and get it out in the field, that it somehow separates within that spray container, and you end up with some really funky patterns in your plots. So we were not able to ratchet down those rates, but I'm pretty confident using UAN as a carrier can help our producers increase their smutgrass control. And just some pictures, just so you can see what this would look like in the field. This is sorry, I didn't change this to pounds per acre. Half pound per acre or a quart per acre, just in water. You can see a lot of green on the smutgrass. You bump that rate up to the full rate in water, you get what you expect under great rainfall conditions. Half rate with 30 or 50 pounds of nitrogen, and with the full rate with 50 pounds of nitrogen, these 3 pictures look nearly identical. So just to give you some visual proof of what a producer might see in the field. All right, so I went back to some of the previous work that we did back in the mid-2000s. We looked at surfactants on the effect of hexazinone on smutgrass, and since hexazinone is primarily taken up by the roots, surfactants that you would normally use for a broadleaf application aren't that helpful. In fact, I told producers that it was pretty much a waste of money to put any surfactant in with hexazinone, as we were not seeing any increase in control. So we started getting wind of some soil surfactants, and some other surfactants that contain nanoparticles and stuff like that. So we decided, well, let's give it a shot and see what happens. So we contacted some companies. We got some products donated that they wanted to see us work on. And we did some small plot work again. And we had hexazinone, same rates, half pound, full pound. And then we had 5 different products that we looked at. And we used the rates that they suggested on their labels. And we used, again, small plot research, ATV backpack sprayer, because this was done in Ona, Florida, as well as in Marianna, Florida. So we had Panhandle as well as Central/Southern Florida represented in this trial. And I mean, nothing earth-shattering, but what I thought was neat, and I believe this is only the Ona location and not the Marianna location. Grounded in both years ended up with the highest level of density reduction, so the highest control. Nano Pro was right behind that, but Nano Pro is not different from hexazinone by itself, and that was the same in both years. Breakthrough was the same as adding nothing to it in both years. So grounded, Nano Pro was kind of on that borderline, and Sorbix, it was back and forth with us too. A lot of variability in those plots. So we also took this to the greenhouse and did simulated rainfall. And this is a little bit backwards from the rest of the slides because now we're looking at regrowth biomass. So the lower the numbers, the better the control. So with grounded NanoPro and Sorbix, we did see about 60 to 70% reduction in the amount of biomass that regrew after the plants were cut off after our initial harvest. So, and we did some fancy stuff and regression lines and tried to figure out what our rainfall range would be for less than 20% regrowth biomass. And without an adjuvant, simulated rainfall, we said 0.3 to 2.4. So that's our range. We needed at least 0.3 inches of rainfall, but no more than 2.4. With the other surfactants, it ranged from 0.2. So we decreased the amount of rainfall we needed. And then 3 to 3.7 inches. So then we increased the amount of rainfall it could tolerate on the other spectrum. So I think this was, the same thing. And I don't know why. Forget that slide. I duplicated that. All right, so I have biological control in here. This is kind of an interesting story. So I went down to Big Cypress a few years ago, probably 10 years ago, if not more now. And I was riding around with the ranch manager there. And he pointed out a smutgrass clump, one smutgrass clump. He goes, "You see that smutgrass clump?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I don't know what's wrong with it." I said, "It's dead." He goes, "Well, exactly." I said, so what's the big deal?" He goes, "I didn't spray it." I was like, "Oh, come on. Somebody sprayed it. There's no way it is dead, just randomly dead." So then he kept driving me around, kept pointing out a smutgrass clump here, smutgrass clump there. And then we end up in this pasture in the picture on the right. And he's got these giant patches of dead smutgrass, and surrounding that are live clumps. I was like, all right, let's get out and look. So this is what I ended up finding. Chinch bugs were absolutely destroying smutgrass clumps, but leaving bahia grass alone. That was really interesting. So that was, like I said, at least 10 years ago. I still get reports from the same gentleman. He's now a private applicator for pastures, applying pesticides and whatnot. And he'll just send me pictures randomly. I'm in such and such county and just saw this. And in fact, this summer, I found clumps here at my center that were dying, and sure enough, they had chinch bugs in them. So we did have an entomologist at one time look at this or try to look at this, but then he retired and never been able to get back with anybody on this. And I was hopeful that maybe it was just going to be specific to smutgrass and not harm any other forages. But I'm finding this summer that I am having forages die, not so much Bahagrass, but some of the others that we have, where smutgrass is also dying. So that's not a good sign that this is going to be a selective biocontrol agent, but I was hopeful. And then more recently, I'm getting a lot of questions about using drones for not only smutgrass, but other weeds and pastures as well. So this actually, hexazinone is not labeled to be applied by a drone in a pasture. However, it can be in forestry and sugarcane. Not sure why. Trying to reach out to companies to try to understand, why that decision was made. I'm going to assume it has something to do with oak trees and pastures because Velpar or hexazinone can be damaging to oaks, but I'm not positive on that. And the people that brought this molecule to the market are more than likely retired. So we are working with other companies to get some data on this. We've had our second trial out using a drone, comparing it to ground applications. There's surprisingly not much difference in control. I expect the drone not to work at all for smutgrass because my field work has shown once I get below 20 gallons per acre of spray solution, control drops significantly. So how they can get the same level of control spraying 2.5 gallons per acre through a drone is beyond me, other than the downdraft into the canopy. So it's really interesting. More to come on that. Kind of excited where that next step's going to go. I am not the applicator. I'm not the pilot. I hire that out, so I don't have to deal with all that. All right, so where are we at today? Somewhere between 1.5 to 2 quarts per acre of hexazinone. That rate can vary if you use Velosa, because like I said, that is a more concentrated product. I do believe that it requires sequential annual applications, at least 2 years, if not 3, depending on the initial infestation. If somebody needs to renovate a pasture, they need to come back in the next year after seeding and apply, or within 2 years, it's going to be back to worse than what they saw before. And this needs to be applied during the rainy season. With glyphosate, and I didn't talk about this in Bermuda grass and stargrass today, but we've had really good success applying this after they've harvested hay. Within 7 to 10 days, applying 16 ounces of glyphosate. There's enough regrowth on the smutgrass to get that to go backwards, and with limited injury on the Bermuda grass and stargrass because it hasn't started to leaf out yet. And then I always talk to my producers about prevention. I can't tell you how many bush hogs I see going down the road with mounds of smutgrass seeds on them. So I try to get them to, you can get a Makita blower at Home Depot and put that in your cab tractor and blow that sucker off before you leave that pasture. And that's just good stuff. Another thing is if you see a smutgrass clump, spray it early. And there's several ways you can spot treat it. So one is with glyphosate. Obviously, that's what most people have around. You can actually spot treat with Velpar, but you're looking at a concentration that is really minimal. 1 ounce in 25 gallons of water, and you're applying 6 ounces of solution per clump. So you have to know how much solution will come out of your spray wand and time that, so you know that you're putting 6 ounces in your clump. But it is doable. I've done that and it works really well. And the last one is a little bit newer. It's been out for a little bit now, but called Pronon Power Pellets. These are actually little pellets, just what they look like. I have done a little bit with these as well. If you use one of these little pellets per clump, it's insane how much material you're putting out per acre. So I've been breaking these up into quarters and putting a quarter of these pellets in a clump, and it does really well. It's still a really high rate if you put that on a per acre basis. But if we're trying to get in front of smutgrass invasion into a pasture or wherever, natural area, I mean, this is something that could work for you because they're relatively easy to handle. They come in small pails, they're resealable. And something you want to try, you can buy a little 3-ounce container with 130 pellets. And if you break that into fours, that's, I can't do math, 520 smutgrass clumps that you can treat. So there's a little bit can go a long way in that point. So take home, Velpars are selective choice, maybe glyphosate in some situations. I think grazing management plays a really large role that we really haven't talked about today. Less gaps in the canopy means you're going to have less smutgrass. Continuous grazing, you're going to have more smutgrass. But our environment in Florida, some places, I mean, especially during the dry season, sometimes you can't get by without continuous grazing. So fortunately, as part of our environment, we're probably going to have to deal with that. But I think having a good grass stand, maintaining that grass stand is going to be our best management tool. And in fact, I said that I visited my colleagues in Australia, and this is a slide from Dr. Vogler in Brisbane. And he said a recurring theme is the importance of competitive, well-managed pasture sward to minimize gaps within the pasture throughout the year, preventing giant rat's tail grass, which is their version of our smutgrass, seeding and establishment from the long-lived soil seed bank. Without a vigorous competitive pasture being present, any attempts to control giant rat's tail grass will be futile. And I think that's a really good statement because I really do agree with that. They have done a lot more work in Australia on the ecology of the species than we have here in the US. The amount of work in the seed ecology that they have done is amazing. And a lot of patience is all I can say because those seeds are tiny. So that is it for me on the presentation side. I'm happy to take questions if you have any. I don't know if you just want to do that through the chat or unmute, however you want to do that.
Yeah, I don't have anything in the chat just yet. I do have a question myself, though. In the beginning, you had talked about, we have the 2 different varieties of smutgrass in Florida. I was wondering if these results, or maybe not these results, but if you've noticed any difference in response to treatment across those 2 different species complex, whatever.
Yeah, so I took that slide out. So actually, what our initial data set showed was that small smutgrass was slightly more difficult to control than giant smutgrass
Okay.
by a tenth of a pound per acre. So at the end of the day, the recommendation was the same. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know, though. Any other questions for Dr. Sellers while we're here? You can feel free to unmute yourself and hop in.
Bored everybody to death.
Maybe they watch this video on the ONA YouTube channel.
So can you talk a little bit about roller chopping? I saw you had that in one slide, and I'm not sure I caught how efficient that was.
Yeah, so back in those days when I was a little bit younger and dumber, I guess, we did a fall roller chopping treatment, and the idea was to overseed the area with ryegrass for winter grazing. And what the roller chopper actually did was it actually rolled those clumps out of the ground. So we ended up with less smutgrass in those plots. Since that point in time, and this is data we're currently working on, talking to producers, they would have never roller chopped in the fall. They would have done that in midsummer. So last year and this year, we've just looked at chopping impacts on smutgrass as well as andropogon species. And I don't have that data in front of me, but saw some of the same results last year. I guess I could have pulled up a video, but it's on my phone. We actually used an aerator, not a roller chopper, in those studies this past 2 years. And sure enough, you could see clumps of smutgrass being uprooted from the aerator. So there's a location Okeechobee and a location here at Ona. Location at Okeechobee, they saw a reduction in smutgrass at that location. I did not hear. It was about the same across treatments. The only thing I can say that's different between the two is the smutgrass density here at Ona was nearly 90% cover. So probably not something you're going to want to do in a pasture that's nearly 100% smutgrass, but in a Bahia grass pasture where maybe you have 40% smutgrass, it might be more doable. We're trying to understand that data set yet, and we don't have our second year in at this point. But thank you for the question.
Any other questions? I actually don't know this. Does smutgrass form a pretty persistent seed bank?
You know, I was always under the impression from a previous faculty member that did work back in the 1970s that the seed was short-lived in the seed bank, anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Australia data is showing upwards of 10 years, but only 20% of the seed bank is viable at year 10. But still in producing 85,000 seeds per square meter.
Right.
Still
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that as you're talking about, functionally tilling over these whole plants, if that was, going to cause an issue down the line.
Yeah.
But if the seed bank isn't particularly long-lived, then perhaps not terribly. Or if you don't have a
Yeah.
lot of soil disturbance.
Yeah, and I'd be lying if I could remember everything that they did. I mean, they looked at a lot of stuff, including fire and how that impacted the soil seed bank. And I don't remember that data without looking it up.
Excuse me. Briefly, I get a question.
Mhm.
Could you go over the sequencing again? It looks like you do pound per acre 1 year, following year at a half pound. Now, what does that look like in the following years? Is there a rest year, a grazing year? If you do one year and you're not going to do one the next year, is it worth doing the 1 year? That sort of mindset.
I'm going to give you my favorite answer. It depends. So it depends on how well the hexazinone works. So if you spray it in year 1 at a full pound rate and you get 90% control and you start seeing seedlings that next year coming back, or some of the clumps are coming back, and you go out with the half pound that next year, and you go out in year 3, you may not need one, but I'd be looking at it at year 4 just to make sure that there's nothing, coming back. I think that's a sequence, and I think it requires scouting basically to see what the plan is going to be. It's really hard because I know, there's some programs out there that are helping producers offset some of their costs. And it's hard to make those plans because, they might fund it for 2 years. But what if it doesn't work in year 1, but it works great, or so in year 2, but you need a 3rd year of application? That's the troubling part. And I don't know how to get around that without go ahead and building a 3-year plan into it and hoping you have great success in years 1 and 2. Maybe year 3 is a conditional thing. I don't know, but then it's hard to put together on the budget side of things. It's not easy.
Hey, Dr. Oh, I
No,
have
go ahead.
Yeah, so if you have a site, because I think I caught this correctly, one of the really important things is to either reseed or add some nitrogen fertilizer to get your Bahia to come back stronger or fill in the gaps. So if you're working on a property where you can't do either of those things and you're just hoping on either the Bahia grass to recover on its own and fill those gaps, or some other native, even pasture weeds come in and fill the gaps, do you have any recommendations for that, or things you should avoid? Like, should you avoid aerating or tilling in those areas if you don't have the options to fertilize or reseed?
You know, we have never looked at aeration after application to see if that's something that would be beneficial. I'm just thinking about, my friends in the sod business. A lot of times they'll disturb the ribbons right after they pull sod. So that's a way to get those rhizomes to spread out a little bit. Sometimes they overseed, sometimes they don't. I don't know that you really need to overseed in those cases. And you don't need to apply nitrogen. That was, more for a producer that has, Bahia grass where they can do that. So you don't have to apply nitrogen. It just helps. And I was doing that to try to make hexazinone more consistent. So if you can't use that, then you might have to switch to something like the grounded or NanoPro to help in that situation. Like, every situation is going to be different. So that's why I go back to my it depends answer.
Okay, yeah, because we're dealing with like improved pasture, and it's still being grazed, but you can't fertilize or seed.
Is that
So
due to
limited.
Was that due to conservation easement, or what's the reasoning for not being able to seed?
Yeah, it's a conservation easement and then just a budgetary thing.
Yeah.
So it's a get rid of the smut grass and allow natives to recover. Try to strike a balance with keeping your cattle leases happy, but not maintaining the improved pasture, because one day it'll be restored. It's
Gotcha.
it's a sticky one.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. The only thing we can do in that case is hope we have the right weather conditions, right? For the best control, but it might just be a multi-year approach. And maybe you bump that first year down to a 3/4 rate because you're going to come back with at least a 1/2 pound, maybe a 3/4 rate the second year. And, kind of spread out that risk that way, because then you're not spending quite as much money doing it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we have been applying hexazinone, and we've seen some success. We've gotten a lot of thistle and ragweed coming back, and the leases will mow that. And there's still, the Bahia does recover on its own if you have decent weather conditions, probably not as well if you could, add some additional seed or fertilizer, but there is a reduction in smut grass. Probably not as great, but there is a reduction.
Yeah. There is some research out of Georgia that showed, and I know you can't do this, showed that when they fertilized the pasture before hexazinone application, that they ended up with better smut grass control and better forage recovery. Now, I don't remember what forage they were using. It may have been Bermuda grass, I don't recall, but kind of interesting. I guess it kind of makes sense. You make the weed grow better, then it's going to take the herbicide up better. So.
Right. Yeah. Interesting approach. Thank you for your answers. Discussion.
If anybody else has any questions any other time, feel free to reach out to me. I'll answer it as quickly as feasibly possible. I'm 50% administration now, so my days are kind of hectic, but I try to help my producers and whoever else, needs help as much as I can.
Awesome. Cool. Well, in the interest of saving time or in preserving everyone's time, I'm going to go through the last few announcements that we have in the FISPAC calendar. But thank you, Dr. Sellers, for that. Go ahead and share my screen. Give it a second. Cool. All right. So a lot of these are just repeats if you were here last week, but that's okay. So just as a reminder that October is Firewood Month. This is hosted by the Nature Conservancy's Don't Move Firewood campaign. So this is their annual outreach initiative to promote responsible firewood practices to reduce the spread of harmful forest pests. They are having a webinar series, I think it's 4 webinars over the course of October that you can register for that talk about various issues around the forest pests and also responsible practices. So you can go to the link here and register for those webinars. There we go. Nature Conservancy is also hiring someone for a technician position in Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve in Bristol. That application closes October 8th, so make sure that if you're going to share this out, excuse me, that you do that soon because the posting closes shortly. A couple other things that we have on the calendar here. For October 2nd, the First Coast Invasive Working Group has their monthly meeting. October 3rd, we have the First Fridays with Florida First Detector. October 3rd, there is the invasive plant identification and management course out of the Extension Office in Chipley that requires registration. So you're going to want to register in advance for that. October 7th, Central Florida CISMA has their monthly meeting. October 15th, North Central CISMA has a grass and sedge ID workshop. I believe we are full on seats for that, but if you have registered, that's just a reminder to you. If you have registered and you can't come, please let us know, let the organizers know so that we can take you off of the list because we do have a waiting list. So if you can't make it, we'd really like to make sure someone else has the opportunity to sit in. October 16th, Virtual Python Patrol. October 18th, there is Firefest in Jonathan Dickinson State Park in South Florida. This is a awareness event that goes on talking about the role of fire in conservation, specific to Jonathan Dickinson State Park. October 22nd, we have our October monthly CISMA call, so we'll see you here on October 22nd to talk about keeping bulrush. Then November 1st is Lagoon Fest 2025. Similar to Firefest, this is in South Florida, focuses in Palm Beach County, the Lake Worth Lagoon, and the conservation value of that water feature in the area. I think with that, that's all that we have. Just a reminder, right, October 22nd, you'll be here for Keeping Bulrush, hopefully. And we are working on scheduling and putting together ideas for our 2026 webinar topics. So if you have any ideas for things that you'd like to see discussed, or any updates on things that maybe have been discussed before, please do reach out to me. Even if it's just a general idea and we don't have a speaker in mind, talk to me. We can come together with an idea and put something on the calendar. With that, that is everything that I have for you all. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Sellers, for giving this presentation today. As I said before, this is recorded and you can watch it on YouTube after the fact. And with that, I hope you have a great day. And thank you so much, everyone.